Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the bleak, putrid, and suspiciously rat-infested world of medieval survival. When staying alive meant dodging fleas, bad air, and your neighbor's coughing fits. Ever wondered what it was like to survive history's worst pandemic? Without soap? If that sounds like your kind of bedtime story, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy this weird little corner of the internet. Drop a comment with your location and the time. Now dim the lights, and let's slip quietly into the past. Imagine waking up to find your neighbor's face has turned black overnight. And no, it's not paint or a drunken prank gone wrong. It's not a rash or a bee sting either. It's just death, making its slow, ugly entrance. Welcome to England in the year 1348. Congratulations, you've arrived just in time for the apocalypse. It doesn't look like much at first. A cough here, a fever there. Maybe old Marjorie down the lane says she's feeling a bit poorly. No one panics. People always feel a bit poorly. That's just medieval life. You work too hard, you eat too little, you get kicked by a cow. Of course you feel poorly. But by the time someone finds Marjorie's corpse slumped face down in her herb garden with blood coming out of her ears, people start to take notice. The peasants in the tiny village of Watton-under-Ledge are no strangers to death. They've buried infants, elders, and the occasional unlucky shepherd trampled by his own flock. But this is something new. Something fast. And worst of all, something that spreads. Now, meet Tom. Just Tom. No last name. Nobody needs one. There's only one Tom in the village anyway. And if there were two, they'd just become Big Tom and Goat Tom. Our Tom is average in every way. Average height, average teeth, meaning he still has 6, and an average job digging in the Lord's fields for an average amount of gruel. Tom wakes up one morning to find his cousin Alice is missing. Not just gone to market missing. She's missing like there's a trail of blood and one shoe missing. Nobody talks about it. They just pretend she's taken ill. That's what you do in the early days of the Black Death. You pretend it's not happening. A very medieval solution to most problems. But pretending only works for about a week. Then the baker dies. Then the baker's wife. Then the baker's wife's goat. And then the goat's fleas move on to the blacksmith's house. You start to notice strange things. The village priest refuses to go near the sick. People begin covering their mouths with cloth dipped in vinegar. Children aren't allowed to play outside anymore, not because of any official decree, but because their parents are too busy burying bodies. And just like that, a whole town's mood shifts. Overnight, laughter becomes suspicious. No one touches. No one hugs. People avoid eye contact like they're afraid it might be contagious too. Peasants don't understand bacteria. They don't need to. They can feel that something in the air has gone sour. The village healer says it's miasma, bad air. So people start hanging herbs from doorways and stuffing lavender up their noses. It smells better, sure, but as a plague repellent, it's about as effective as whispering, "Go away," to a hurricane. A few of the smarter villagers decide to flee. But Tom has nowhere to go. Peasants don't have vacation homes. His world is a 1-mile radius of mud, goats, and mild despair. He's not staying put because he's brave. He's staying because his entire existence is tied to this place. And besides, the nearest village has already locked its gates. Tom's mother starts carrying a cross made of thorns. His sister insists they recite the Lord's Prayer before every meal, during every meal, and right after vomiting up the meal. The superstition escalates rapidly. One day, someone burns all their clothes in the yard. Another family drags their livestock into the church to be blessed. The priest, already coughing, doesn't object. And then comes the worst part, the boils. They're not subtle. They show up under your arms, on your neck, in your groin, as if they're trying to be both painful and embarrassing. They swell up, black and oozing, until they burst like spoiled fruit. It's not poetic. It's just gross. Tom sees his uncle die in under 2 days. He went from, "Maybe I just ate something bad," to "Don't let the rats eat my face" in 48 hours flat. Every household starts digging its own shallow graves. The ground is too cold for proper burials, but no one cares. You can't be sentimental when your cousin is leaking plague fluid onto the rushes. And still, they try to hold on to routine. Bread is baked. Cows are milked. Fires are tended. Not because life is normal, but because pretending it is offers the only comfort left. At night, Tom sits beside the fire, watching the embers flicker across his family's worried faces. His mother is muttering a prayer under her breath. His sister is scratching at her neck. Just a flea, hopefully. Outside, someone screams. But inside, there is still warmth. There is still bread. There is still breath. And for now, that is enough. For now. You know it's bad when the village stops ringing the church bell for funerals. At first, they tried. Every time someone died, the bell tolled once, slow and solemn, like a warning. But after the 6th death in a single morning, even the priest gave up. His arms were tired. His lungs were failing. His faith? Hanging by a thread, somewhere between "God is testing us" and "God has clearly packed up and left." By now, Tom has stopped counting the bodies. He tried to keep track at first, maybe out of habit, maybe just to convince himself that there would be a final number. But there isn't. There's only more than yesterday, and probably not the last. The village smells different now, less like manure and burnt porridge, more like rot and damp wool. The air hangs heavy with the scent of death, and those over-perfumed herb bundles everyone keeps shoving in their tunics. Someone's even started carrying a posy of garlic and crushed mint tied to a stick. It smells like someone tried to cook stew using only fear. Tom's home has turned into something between a quarantine zone and a shrine. His mother hasn't left her bed in days, not because she's sick, but because she's convinced she will be. She lies there fully dressed, muttering prayers, occasionally taking sips of onion tea, which tastes exactly as appetizing as it sounds. His sister has taken to scrubbing everything with vinegar. The walls, the floor, the goat. And when that didn't work, she started scrubbing Tom. With a bristled brush. Spoiler, it did not cure the plague, but it did remove several layers of skin. Out in the village square, things have gone very quiet. No one is selling bread. The miller boarded up his door days ago and hasn't been seen since. Either he fled, or he's dead, and very politely decomposing behind a barrel of half-ground barley. The children used to run around barefoot, shouting and chasing each other with sticks. Now they're kept indoors. Or worse, they've gone missing. Tom hears whispers about whole families vanishing in the night, not from fear, but from superstition. If enough people disappear before they die, maybe the plague won't know where to find them. As if the Black Death is a confused tax collector. People try everything. One man walks the village muttering Latin backwards, convinced it's a protective chant. A widow builds a small altar of dried apples and coins in front of her door. A desperate father digs a pit and burns his daughter's clothing, sobbing into the smoke. They say if you burn everything the sick have touched, it stops the spread. This would be a wonderful idea if they understood what the spread actually was. Fleas, rats, air, bad vibes. No one really knows. So they blame everyone. Jews, foreigners, travelers, midwives, cats. The particularly moody cow in Field 7. Anyone or anything becomes a target if it helps people feel like they've got even a shred of control. Fear is a ravenous thing. It doesn't care what it chews on. Tom hears about villages nearby that are burning people alive. Accusations of poisoning wells. Secret curses. A man was lynched in the next town over because someone said his shadow looked unusual. Meanwhile, the real killer scuttles between thatched roofs, silent and smug, riding on the back of fleas who are just thrilled to be included. One day, a procession appears. They're called the Flagellants, self-proclaimed holy men who march barefoot from village to village, beating themselves with whips and singing hymns that sound suspiciously off-key. They claim suffering will save them. They invite others to join. One man from the village does. He returns 3 days later, bloodied, limping, and oddly proud. He says he feels cleansed. Tom watches him cough blood into a handkerchief 2 hours later. Meanwhile, the village priest, Father Alric, has reached new heights of unhelpfulness. He refuses to bury the dead unless they've confessed their sins, but he also refuses to go near anyone who's ill. This makes confession a bit tricky. His solution? Shouting absolution from a safe distance while waving a stick with a tiny cross tied to the end. The good news? He finally stops hoarding the communion wine. The bad news? He drinks most of it himself. By midweek, the food is running out. Tom's family has half a sack of oats, a turnip with ideas above its station, and one confused chicken who keeps laying eggs in people's shoes. His mother has taken to boiling water with a rock in it, telling everyone it's bone broth. It's not. It's a rock. But you nod and pretend it's delicious because what else can you do? Peasants don't have the luxury of supply chains or emergency granaries. What you grow, you eat. What you save, you survive on. And what you don't? Well, maybe the neighbors have something, assuming they'll still open the door. Tom, desperate, tries to trade a pair of wool socks for a loaf of bread. The baker's cousin takes the socks, sniffs them, and slams the door. This is the moment survival shifts. It's no longer about avoiding disease. It's about outlasting it, about not starving, not freezing, not falling into despair so deep you forget how to pray. One night, Tom hears something outside. He peeks through the slat in the wall. 2 villagers are digging. Not a grave, a pantry. They're robbing the blacksmith's storehouse. You don't blame them. You just pray they don't check yours next. Back in the house, the hearth flickers weakly. No one speaks. The silence is heavy. Not because there's nothing to say, but because everyone is afraid to hear the answers. Tom stares into the fire, clutching the rock that was supposed to be dinner, wondering which will come first. Another death, or the sound of his own stomach giving up. Outside, the wind howls like something ancient. The village sleeps uneasily, one shallow breath at a time. Because tomorrow? Tomorrow might be the day the fever comes. It begins with a cough. Not a dramatic one, just a little dry sound in the throat. The kind that could mean dust, or talking too much, or sleeping near a goat with questionable hygiene. But in 1348, no cough is innocent. Tom freezes. He hears it again. Not from across the house, not from the neighbor's yard, but from his own bed. His sister Meg, rubs her chest and shrugs. "Must have swallowed a crumb funny," she says. Nobody corrects her. Nobody breathes too deeply either. That night, Tom doesn't sleep. The hearth crackles faintly, casting shadows on the walls. He watches Meg's chest rise and fall, then stop, then rise again. Every pause makes his stomach clench. You've never been more aware of someone breathing until you're scared they might stop doing it, or worse, start doing it weird. By morning, it's worse. She's sweating through her tunic. Her face is pale, lips dry, and when she sits up, Tom sees it. A swelling, just beneath her arm. The size of a plum and getting bigger. No one speaks the word, but it hangs in the air like chimney smoke. Bubo. That's the name of the boil. The signature. The grotesque calling card of the Black Death. If you see one, it's already too late to pray. You just hope it doesn't spread. To your face, to your groin, to your neighbors. Meg doesn't cry. She just looks tired. Tired in a way that suggests her bones are holding a meeting to discuss resignation. Tom's mother tries to help. She brews something foul-smelling with nettles, ash, and a whisper of desperation. She rubs onion on the boil. She burns a piece of cloth and waves it over Meg's chest while chanting a mix of Latin, local folklore, and whatever words come to mind. You try everything when you don't know what works. The healer refuses to come. She's already lost 3 children, and now won't leave her hut unless it's to bury one of them. The priest has vanished. Some say he fled. Others say he's dead. Either way, no last rites are coming. So Tom takes charge, not because he knows what he's doing, but because no one else can. He keeps the fire burning. He soaks cloth in cold water and lays it across Meg's forehead. He empties the chamber pot. He hums songs under his breath, ones from before all this, before the world turned into a fever dream stitched together with fear and smoke. The days blur. Meg gets worse, then better, then worse again. Her fever rages. The bubo bursts. Black pus spilling onto the floor rushes. You'd think the smell would be the worst part. But no, it's the sound. A soft squelch, followed by a wet gasp, and then silence. But she doesn't die. Not yet. And this is where things get weird. Because in the middle of this grim little hut, where hope is rationed like clean water, something strange happens. Meg keeps breathing. She keeps breathing through the night, through the second swelling, through the fever that nearly cooks her from the inside out. Tom doesn't understand it. No one does. But each morning, she's still alive, paler, thinner, soaked in sweat, and half delirious, but alive. And that, in 1348, is a miracle. Now, you'd think the family would be relieved, maybe celebrate, raise a toast with the last of the vinegar ale, and sing a hymn. But instead, they panic. Because in the middle of a plague, survival is suspicious. Neighbors start whispering. Why is she still breathing? What did they do? What didn't they do? The village mind, already teetering on the edge of hysteria, topples over. A woman who survives the plague is either blessed or cursed, possibly both. Either way, she's dangerous. One afternoon, someone throws mud at the door. No note, just a silent, sloppy message. We see you. And suddenly, Tom realizes they're not just trying to survive the disease. They're surviving the people who survive it. The irony? Delicious. The villagers, who once huddled together for warmth, now treat each other like lepers. Everyone is a suspect. Everyone is a carrier. If your face isn't gray, maybe you're hiding something. Maybe you made a deal. Maybe it's witchcraft. After all, how else do you explain a peasant who beats the plague? Tom tries to reason with them. He walks into the village square, or what's left of it. It smells like old death and wet rushes. Half the stalls are abandoned. The other half are occupied by hollow-eyed villagers arguing over turnips like it's gold bullion. He explains Meg is recovering. Just luck, just care. No sorcery involved, no animal sacrifices, just soup and water, and a lot of sitting around waiting to cry. No one believes him. A man asks if they've seen any black cats around lately. Another suggests maybe the family has been hiding bad air under the floorboards. This is what panic does. It trades logic for rumors, evidence for torches. Back at the hut, Meg is sitting up. She asks for water. She even makes a joke. Something about Tom's cooking being worse than the plague. It's a good sign. Possibly the first good sign in weeks. But Tom doesn't laugh. Because there are 3 men gathering outside. One has a pitchfork, and the fire is burning low. There's a sound outside, the unmistakable shuffle of people trying not to be noticed. Which, let's be honest, never works. You can't hide the clank of a pitchfork, especially not in a village where every twig, puddle, and unfortunate goose echoes like a church bell. Tom stands very still, one hand on the door, one eye on his sister. Meg is sitting up, pale as ash, but alert. She's managed a few sips of water, a few bites of barley mash, and even tied back her hair with a strip of linen that looks suspiciously like someone's old sock. A classic medieval fashion statement. Outside, someone knocks, politely, which is more terrifying than shouting. Tom opens the door to find 3 men standing in the mud. Not just any men. These are villagers he's known his whole life. One helped him build the pig pen. Another once loaned him a shovel. The third cried at Meg's christening. Now all 3 look at him like he's already guilty. They don't say hello. They don't ask how she is. The tallest one clears his throat and gets straight to the point. How come she's still alive? Ah, the medieval Inquisition, a method of truth-finding that relies mostly on vibes, peer pressure, and the unsettling ability to blame anything on women. Tom explains, again, that Meg is recovering. No tricks, no spells, no potions, just broth, vinegar cloths, and endless muttered prayers to saints no one remembers the names of. The men exchange looks. One mutters something about the devil taking odd interest in this house. Another swears he saw a crow on the roof last night, and everyone knows what that means. Tom suggests gently that maybe they've all been under a bit of stress lately. The man with the pitchfork steps forward. It's not natural, he says. The fever takes everyone, but not her. There's a pause, long enough for the wind to deliver a perfect theatrical creak from the roof beams. If there were stage directions for peasant paranoia, this would be them. Tom tries not to panic. He tries reason, facts, evidence. He gestures to Meg, who is currently trying to sit up without vomiting. She waves feebly at the pitchfork man. Not exactly the mark of a powerful enchantress, but the men are unmoved. And then Tom says the one thing you should never say to a group of scared medieval villagers holding farm tools. She's just lucky. You could hear a flea scratch its belly in the silence that follows. See, in a time when survival is rare, luck isn't just suspicious, it's heretical. If someone lives while others die, it must be for a reason. And if God isn't involved, well, then guess who is? Tom closes the door before they can say anything else. He bars it. Not because he thinks they'll storm the house, but because he's suddenly very aware that they might. He turns to Meg, whose eyes are wide. "They think I'm cursed," she says. "No," Tom lies. "They think you're too healthy. Entirely different issue." Outside, the footsteps fade, but the damage is done. The village now watches them like wolves eyeing the only sheep that hasn't keeled over. Their house becomes a no-man's land. No one visits. No one trades. No one even spits near the door, which, oddly enough, is the most polite gesture anyone's made in weeks. Tom begins sleeping with a knife. Not a good one, just the same dull blade they use for splitting turnips. Still, it feels better than nothing. He takes shifts watching the fire, checking the windows, and glaring into the darkness like a man trying to will the plague to get bored and go elsewhere. Meg improves slowly. Each day, she speaks a little more, stands a little longer. Her fever breaks. Her bubo scabs over. She stops hallucinating about Saint Apollonia riding a pig through the kitchen. They have no more vinegar, no more onions, and only a few spoonfuls of grain left. But they have something absurd, something reckless. Hope. That's when the priest returns. No one saw him arrive. One moment, the village was priestless, godless, and vaguely on fire. The next, Father Alric stumbles into the square, wearing a soot-streaked robe and the haunted look of a man who's been hiding in a crypt and reconsidering his career choices. He's thinner, paler, but very much alive. And he's angry. At the plague, at sin, at people who skipped Mass, at people who held Mass without him, at anyone who dared to think they could die without permission. He preaches hellfire. He preaches repentance. He insists that the plague is punishment for everything from laziness to unclean thoughts to putting goats in the wrong barn. And then he hears about Meg. He visits their hut, uninvited. Of course. Tom lets him in, reluctantly. Father Alric walks in like he owns the air. He sniffs. He eyes Meg. He examines the still healing wound under her arm with the disdain of a man who has no idea what he's looking at, but disapproves anyway. "You're a lucky girl," he says. Meg nods. Father Alric narrows his eyes. "Or, you made a bargain." Meg blinks. "With who? The chicken?" Tom steps between them. He tells the priest, very calmly, that Meg's survival has nothing to do with bargains, just care. And maybe God, if God's still taking applications. Alric doesn't respond, but he leaves a small cross on their table and mutters a prayer as he walks out. Not for Meg, mind you, for everyone else. Later that night, someone throws a dead rat at the door. It's wrapped in a ribbon. Apparently, curses come with gift wrapping now. Inside, Meg coughs. Just once. A leftover tickle, nothing more. But Tom hears it like thunder. Because he knows the truth. The plague may have passed them by, but the village hasn't. And in 1348, sometimes the hardest thing to survive is your own neighbors. When you live through the Black Death, there's no celebration, no triumphant procession, no dramatic score swelling as the final bubo heals. There's just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels too big for the little village it's settled over. Watton-under-Ledge is barely recognizable now. Half the huts are empty. Some have doors swinging in the wind. Others are sealed tight with planks and symbols meant to ward off whatever spirits the occupants think might still be lingering. Spoiler, it wasn't spirits. It was fleas. But try getting a 14th century peasant to exorcise a flea. Tom stands in what used to be the market square, which now hosts approximately 3 people and one very confused goat. He's thinner. Not the elegant kind of thin, the medieval kind, where your clothes fit better only because your muscles gave up. He's carrying a bucket, not because he needs water, but because carrying things gives him an excuse not to make eye contact. Meg is outside for the first time in days. She's bundled in every tunic they own, and still walks like she's forgotten how legs work. But she's walking. Her cheeks have color. Her sarcasm is back. She's alive. And unfortunately, that's still a problem. Since her recovery, people have stopped bothering with subtlety. They don't whisper anymore. They just glare. They don't say hello. They say things like, "Still breathing, are you?" Or, "I suppose death doesn't fancy everyone." Tom once overheard someone mutter, "She made a deal, you know. No one gets better without giving something up." Which is funny, because if Meg gave anything up, it was her dignity the night she hallucinated Saint Apollonia riding a pig named Harold. But sure, let's go with devil magic. Still, the whispers don't become pitchforks this time. Not quite. Maybe because people are too tired. Maybe because they've run out of matches. Or maybe because Father Alric declared the plague officially passed and ordered a Thanksgiving Mass, which only 3 people attended, all of whom brought their own seating and kept 6 feet apart, inventing social distancing 600 years too early. Meg doesn't care about the stairs. Not much, anyway. She says she doesn't blame them. When the world falls apart, people need something to point at, she tells Tom one night by the fire. And I happen to be standing. They eat boiled turnips in silence after that. Turnips, the food that says, "We've survived, but we're not enjoying it." The village begins the slow, awkward process of pretending everything's fine again. Bread ovens are relit. Chickens repopulate. Someone even throws a wedding. A small one, mind you, and no one hugs the bride. But nothing is the same. Every empty house is a reminder. Every weed-covered grave a whisper. Every laugh feels like it's checking first to see if it's allowed. Tom tries to rebuild the garden. The soil's dry. The tools are rusting. And the goat keeps eating the fence. But he keeps digging. Because digging feels like progress, or at least a distraction from the fact that half the people he's ever known are now somewhere under the same dirt he's planting beans in. One evening, a boy shows up at their door. Not from the village, a traveler, maybe 12 years old. Ragged clothes, wide eyes, no shoes. He doesn't say much, just that he walked from 3 villages over and his family didn't make it. Tom looks at Meg. Meg looks at Tom. They nod. He stays. They give him soup. They give him a blanket. They don't ask questions. Because if the plague taught them anything, it's that survival is no longer just about making it through alive. It's about helping someone else do the same. Weeks pass. Then months. The church bell rings again, not for death, but for the first spring planting. Children start playing in the square. Quieter now, like they remember the ghosts still lingering near the walls. Meg starts teaching the traveler boy how to read. Well, how to recognize symbols etched into firewood. Close enough. She insists it counts. One morning, Tom finds her sitting by the river, staring at the water. "Do you think it'll come back?" she asks. "The plague?" She nods. Tom shrugs. "Probably. Everything terrible eventually does." Meg snorts. Comforting. "But next time," he says, "we'll know how to hide the goat faster." They sit in silence for a while. The breeze carries the smell of damp earth, and something that almost resembles hope. Because the truth is, the Black Death never really ends. Not in the way you think. It lingers, in the way people speak more quietly, in how children sleep a little closer to their parents, in how no one trusts a warm forehead ever again. But life goes on. People bake bread. They laugh, cautiously. They plant things. They bury things, and slowly, almost stubbornly, they live. Because that's what peasants do. They endure. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how many candles burn down to nubs, someone always wakes up the next day and says, "Right, let's try again." So if you ever think the world is ending, and you very well might, just remember the ones who survived it with nothing but turnips, superstition, and sheer stubborn hope. They didn't win, they just didn't die. And somehow, in 1349, that was enough. Now, take a breath. You've survived the story. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream a little quieter tonight, knowing that somewhere in history, someone else already faced the end of the world and kept going. The second history is how a medieval apothecary struggled to supply a plague doctor. Imagine trying to make medicine in a world where most people think bad smells cause death. Welcome to 1348. The apothecary's name is Elric, though no one bothers to learn it unless they're dying, which, in this town, is practically everyone. His shop squats between the tanner's reeking shack and a suspiciously leaning bakery that's been closed since the baker coughed himself into the afterlife last week. The sign outside, of faded mortar and pestle carved into worm-eaten wood, hangs crooked, mostly held up by spiderwebs and pessimism. Elric isn't a wizard, thank you very much. He gets that a lot. Townsfolk stagger in asking for charms, love potions, or something to make their husbands stop snoring. He tells them no, of course, though between you and me, he does keep a jar of dried lizard tails in the back, labeled "for marital harmony," just to shut people up. But these days, no one's asking for romance. They're asking for theriac. They're asking for vinegar compresses. They're asking sometimes just to be held while they expire, which is not, strictly speaking, in Elric's job description. Now, it's worth pointing out that medicine in the 14th century is mostly guesswork performed with herbs, hope, and an unshakable confidence in the four bodily humors. If you've got a fever, you've got too much blood. If you're melancholic, it's the black bile acting up again. Sneezing? Obviously demonic vapors escaping the soul. The cure? Probably a good bleeding, some garlic, and, if Elric's in a generous mood, a poultice made of mashed leeks and blessed pig fat. But lately, the line outside his shop has grown longer, quieter, and more panicked. The Black Death has arrived, hitching a ride on fleas who rode rats, who hitched boats from somewhere far too warm and far too crowded. Now it's here, in Elric's village, and his jars are emptying faster than he can mislabel them. That's where the real trouble starts. You see, a certain plague doctor has arrived, the kind with the bird beak mask stuffed full of rosemary and orange peel. He says his name is Magister Severin, but Elric suspects that's just what happens when a failed monk gets too many ideas and a surplus of leather. Severin speaks only in declarations, never questions. He doesn't ask if Elric has galangal root. He orders it, along with crushed amber, myrrh resin, and a full sack of dried rose petals. For warding. Rose petals. As if the plague is a lovelorn ghost with seasonal allergies. But Elric can't say no. The doctor has authority, a wax-sealed letter from the city council, and the unnerving habit of appearing directly behind you without a sound. "Supply me," Severin commands one morning, his voice echoing like someone speaking through a wine jug, or the village dies. Ah, the usual light breakfast conversation. The problem? Elric is nearly out of everything. His last shipment of cinnamon bark got borrowed by a priest convinced it could drive away the devil. His willow bark's been used up in teas to soothe the dying. And the monk who promised to deliver powdered bezoar stone, yes, the one made from the stomachs of goats, disappeared shortly after asking whether demons could live in toenails. So now Elric is supposed to supply a plague doctor with nothing. He stares at his nearly bare shelves, a few dried yarrow stalks, half a jar of wormwood, and something that may have been a frog once. Maybe. Hard to tell anymore. But here's the twist. Elric wants to help. Despite the sarcasm, the grime, and the overwhelming smell of vinegar-soaked bandages, he genuinely wants to keep people alive. It's just that most of them are beyond help, and the ones who aren't, well, they're starting to whisper that Elric's shop is cursed, that maybe he's not just an apothecary. Maybe he brought the plague. Maybe he's feeding it. You see how that complicates things? Now, imagine trying to do all this with no refrigeration, no gloves, and a ledger made of parchment so thin you can see your own regret through it. Elric records every sale with a trembling quill. Comfrey root, 1 dram, elderflower tincture, gone, poppy syrup, missing, possibly stolen, or possibly swallowed during a particularly rough Tuesday. And yet, every evening, he stays open. Candles flickering, mortar grinding, prayers whispered under breath. Because despite everything, the rats, the deaths, the slow encroachment of plague like a fog through the alleys, there's still hope. Ridiculous, stubborn hope. The same kind that builds cathedrals and raises children and writes love letters in the dirt. Tonight, a new order sits on his table, scrawled in Severin's angular script. I require 7 ounces of viper meat, distilled myrtle oil, and 4 bezoars. Urgently. Elric sighs, reaches for his satchel, and heads out into the dark. Because, you see, the viper doesn't catch itself, and what he finds in the woods will change everything. The first time you try to catch a viper with a stick and a prayer, you either become much braver or much deader. Fortunately, Elric leans toward cowardice, which, historically, is excellent for long-term survival. The woods beyond the village aren't exactly a pleasant stroll. They're a swampy tangle of brambles, root-clutched earth, and the occasional inexplicable hole that smells of mushrooms and regret. But it's where the vipers live. Or, more accurately, where Severin insists the vipers live. Now, a brief historical curiosity. Snake flesh was believed to have powerful medicinal properties. Dry it, grind it, stir it into a tincture with some wine, and voila, you had a plague remedy, or at least something to sell to frighten people who'd try anything that didn't bite back. The problem? Vipers do, in fact, bite back. Elric trudges through the mud with a canvas sack, a half-rotten carrot, bait, though it's unclear if vipers even eat carrots, and a very shaky understanding of herpetology. His boots squelch, his knees complain, his satchel, slung over his shoulder, jingles with empty glass vials, a sound that would be cheerful if it didn't mean they were all waiting to be filled with snake. He finally spots one, curled under a rock, sunning itself like it doesn't have venom sacs loaded with disaster. Elric kneels gingerly. You can feel the tension in his shoulders, like a man trying to thread a needle while a choir of monks screams at him from a distance. He whispers a few calming words to the snake, entirely useless, of course, and reaches out with a forked stick. The viper hisses. He flinches. The stick drops. 15 minutes later, he's limping back with one squirming burlap sack, a bleeding thumb, and a new resolve to never trust reptiles or plague doctors ever again. Back at his apothecary, Elric dumps the bag on his prep table and stares at it like it might explode. The snake's not dead yet, which poses a problem. He's supposed to skin it, gut it, dry it, and grind it into powder. There's a book that explains this. He's misplaced it, naturally, likely beneath the jar labeled Mysterious Fungi, possibly evil. He does what any overworked medieval pharmacist would do: improvises. Soon the shop is filled with the eye-watering scent of roasted snake and boiling vinegar. Elric sways slightly from the fumes, murmuring a prayer to Saint Sebastian, patron of plagues, archers, and poor decisions. The door creaks open behind him. It's Severin. Again. Of course. The doctor glides in like a judgmental crow. The beaked mask tilts toward the bubbling cauldron. Is that reptile I smell? Elric resists the urge to say, "No, it's your personality." Instead, he nods and gestures to the table, where 3 sad vials of snake extract wait beside a 4th filled with something vaguely oily and possibly myrtle-flavored. Possibly lamp oil. Hard to say at this point. Severin reaches down with gloved fingers, lifts a vial, and studies it against the window light. "This will suffice," he intones. "Now, the bezoars." Elric blinks. "You mean the ones I told you I don't have because they come from goats that live on a mountain 2 weeks from here?" "Correct," Severin replies, cheerfully ignoring the sarcasm. There's a long pause. A quiet, air-thick pause. And then, slowly, Elric begins to laugh. It's not a joyful laugh. More like the desperate chuckle of a man realizing that his career, reputation, and possibly his life all hinge on acquiring goat stomach stones from a mythical location known primarily for sheep and bad weather. But you know Elric. He doesn't quit. He complains with flair. He sighs like a man rehearsing for a one-man tragedy. But he doesn't stop. He digs through his back room, through shelves stacked with foxglove and feverfew, sacks of barley powder, forgotten dried leeches, crunchy, and a jar labeled "human teeth" for decorative use only. Finally, he finds it. A dusty book on exotic cures and plausible lies, tucked under a moldy crate of mustard seeds. And there, scribbled in a margin, is a note. If no bezoars available, substitute dried toad liver soaked in wine. Patients will never know. Is it ethical? Certainly not. Is it going to work? Probably not. Is he going to try it anyway? You bet he is. That night, Elric stands over a steaming bowl of claret and amphibian offal, muttering apologies to Hippocrates and the general concept of decency. He pours the resulting sludge into 4 clay vials, corks them, and writes, in his best script, "Bezoar substitute, extremely potent, definitely authentic." He places them neatly beside the snake extract and the oil. Severin will be back at dawn. And what happens after that? Well, let's just say the first patient to try the mixture doesn't have quite the reaction anyone expected. You know it's going to be a strange day when your first patient of the morning starts foaming at the mouth. And it wasn't even the plague this time. Elric watches the woman thrash gently on the apothecary's floor like a landed trout. Her name is Isabel, and she was only supposed to take 2 spoonfuls. 2. But she drank the whole vial, declaring it smelled like wine, but intelligent. That was 30 seconds ago. Now she's muttering in tongues and attempting to bite her own shoe. Severin, naturally, is unbothered. The plague doctor looms nearby, arms folded, mask unmoved, though that could just be the leather. "A mild reaction," he says, in the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. The toxin is adjusting her humors. You, dear listener, might be tempted to say something like, adjusting her humors to what exactly? Frenzied goat mode? But Elric's too tired to argue. He just nods, writes "result," agitated, in his logbook, and gently places a wooden spoon between Isabel's teeth. She's fine, eventually. She sits up an hour later, asks if it's Tuesday, and then wanders off claiming she can now see sounds. Technically, that counts as a cure, and so, as absurd as it seems, word spreads. People begin arriving not just because they're dying, but because someone's cousin's neighbor's butcher's niece got better. Sort of. If you squint. One man arrives with a pustule the size of a turnip and asks for whatever she had. A woman with a hacking cough demands the snake potion that makes your skin tingle. Elric, to his credit, does not throw anyone out a window, though he does consider it, twice. Meanwhile, Severin has decided to double the orders. He slaps a fresh list onto Elric's counter one misty morning. 10 vials by tomorrow. We move to the manor next. Highborns are falling. Ah yes, the manor, where the nobles live in drafty stone palaces with walls thick enough to muffle the sound of peasants coughing outside. They've stayed quiet so far, convinced the plague only bothers poor people, like rats or tax collectors. But now their servants are dying. And suddenly, they're interested. Elric rubs his eyes. Do you know how long it takes to dry a viper liver? It's not exactly a brisk process. And the goat substitute worked, Severin interrupts, spectacularly. You mean the hallucinations? I mean the spiritual clarity. Elric stares at him. You can't see Severin's eyes through the dark glass goggles, but you can feel the self-satisfaction radiating off him like a smug chimney. That night, Elric doesn't sleep. He grinds herbs, slices roots, bottles mixtures that smell like shoe polish and sadness. He adds labels in Latin to make them seem fancy, even if they mostly read like, "Do not ingest before noon," and "possibly fatal, but only emotionally." By dawn, 10 vials sit neatly on the work table. Warm, earthy, slightly suspicious. Elric loads them into a basket lined with straw and a prayer, and follows Severin up the winding road to the manor house. The manor, as expected, reeks of desperation and perfume. Nobles in velvet gowns that haven't been washed since St. Crispin's feast day lounge on chaises longues, coughing delicately into embroidered kerchiefs and asking questions like, "But what color is the plague?" One insists she feels an ominous draft and demands Severin seal the windows with crushed emeralds. Elric nearly corrects her. Nearly. Instead, he smiles, hands her a vial labeled Aqua Serpentis, and backs away slowly. The rest of the day unfolds like a fever dream. Nobles gulping down Elric's concoctions. One man swears his vision cleared. Another says he can now smell moonlight. Lady Rosamond, never one to be left out, takes 2 vials, dances a wobbly jig, and announces that death can wait its turn. Severin is delighted. "We are reversing the tide," he declares to a room full of semi-conscious aristocrats. Elric, however, is beginning to worry. You see, none of them are dying from the plague. Not yet, and he knows enough about disease to know what's coming next. These aren't cures. They're clever stall tactics. Snake oil with slightly more snake. And sooner or later, someone's going to take the wrong dose, or the wrong person is going to drop dead mid-ritual. And then, well, then Elric will be the one hanging from the village gallows, probably with a sign around his neck that reads, "Witch apothecary, peddler of demonic liquids." But that's not the only thing gnawing at him. There's a page missing from his herbarium. He only noticed this morning, a tear where there used to be a recipe. An old remedy, possibly real, possibly dangerous, definitely rare. He remembers only the title, Blackwort Elixir for Fevers of Unknown Nature. He didn't remove it, but someone did. And that someone came through his shop 2 nights ago when he was asleep on a sack of chamomile. He remembers the door creaking, a hand gloved in leather, the faint scent of rosemary and burnt cloth, the scent Severin always carries. You feel that chill running up your spine? That's because Elric just realized the plague doctor isn't just using him. He's hiding something, and whatever it is, it's buried deep in the next order he's already sent. There's nothing quite like waking up to the sound of nobles screaming, except maybe waking up to find out you're the reason they're doing it. Elric bolts upright, smacking his head against the underside of a shelf labeled Miscellaneous, Regret. Sinund, the bell above the apothecary's door, is ringing like it's being chased. Outside, the village is buzzing, not the usual low grumble of complaints and foot rot, but a sharp-edged panic, like someone shouted, "Fire!" in a room full of tax records. He stumbles to the doorway and sees a servant, young, out of breath, hair matted to his face, galloping up the road on a borrowed mule. "Elric!" the boy wheezes, slipping off the animal in a motion that is technically dismounting, but looks more like collapsing sideways. They're dropping like stew flies, the manor, the nobles. Lady Rosamond's face turned purple. Right. So that would be the new symptom. Plague's moving faster now. Inside the shop, something shatters. A vial. Somewhere on the back shelf. Elric flinches. Not from the sound, from the timing. See? He was expecting this. Not hoping, obviously. No one dreams of noble corpses as a career highlight. But he knew. He saw it in their eyes yesterday. Glassy, fever-glazed, the sort of stare you get when your soul is checking out of the inn, but your body hasn't packed yet. He grabs his satchel. Bandages. Dried sage. What's left of the theriac paste, which smells increasingly like expired mustard. Then the basket with the remaining vials. Only 6 left. He was going to sell them to desperate travelers. Guess not. And, of course, he brings the missing herbarium page. He found it. Tucked inside Severin's coat pocket, when the plague doctor left it hanging unattended in the back room. Along with 3 beeswax candles, a small bone dice, and a suspicious amount of crushed blackwort. That's the thing. Severin said he needed snake extract, bezoars, myrtle oil. He never once asked for blackwort, because he already had it. Now, if you're not familiar with blackwort, also known as Comfrey's moody cousin, here's your historical curiosity of the day. It was a rare herb used in treating fevers of divine origin, which is 14th century speak for we have absolutely no idea what's happening, but it feels spiritual and terrifying. Blackwort wasn't common. It grew only near bogs that smelled like old sins and goat cheese, and it had side effects, like hallucinations, like blood that ran cold, like, and this is important, accelerated necrosis when used on plague sores. Yes, that's right. If someone with early plague symptoms took a dose of blackwort, they'd worsen, quickly. They'd die faster than the infection could naturally progress. Now take a breath, because this is where it gets interesting. When Elric reaches the manor gates, the guards are already gone. One door hangs open. A trail of bloody cloth leads inside, across the marble floor like a path in a particularly macabre fairy tale. The great hall is chaos, people wailing, others gasping. Elric recognizes the smell immediately, not the sour stink of fear or the sharp bite of incense. Blackwort burned. There's a brazier near the dais, a bundle of herbs still smoldering. Someone lit a ritual fire, probably under Severin's instructions. Elric moves through the bodies, checking pulses. Lady Rosamond is slumped over a pillow, still warm, barely breathing. One of the lords, he thinks his name is Oswin, or something equally punchable, grabs his wrist. "Cure? Me?" the man croaks, eyes fluttering. Elric offers a vial, one of the fakes. It might help, or not. At this point, it's like throwing a snowball at a house fire and hoping for a miracle. And then he sees Severin. The doctor stands at the back of the room, motionless, watching, not helping, not moving. "Elric," he says, calm, hollow. "You should not be here." "Neither should they be dead," Elric snaps, gesturing to the writhing mess behind him. "You gave them blackwort, in the fire." "I offered them sanctification," Severin says, "an easing of passage. They were infected. Better this than the slow rot." "Better for who?" Elric's voice rises. "For you?" Now here's the thing about plague doctors. They wear masks to block smells, but they also wear them to hide. You can't see Severin's face, his eyes, whether he's smug or furious or, worse, entirely unmoved. "They paid," Severin says simply. "We treated them. We failed. The disease is beyond herbs. It is a judgment." Oh, that old tune. God's wrath, sinful cities, burn the infected, cleanse the world. Except Elric's not buying it. Because this wasn't divine punishment. This was a test. Severin used the manner as a controlled experiment. Different combinations, different doses, observed and recorded. He wasn't trying to cure them. He was trying to learn from them, from their deaths. You can almost hear the heartbeat in Elric's ears. He does the unthinkable. He steps forward, rips the mask off Severin's face, and finds nothing beneath it but a man. Ordinary, pale, tired, older than expected. Not mad, not wicked, just convinced. "I've saved more than I've lost," Severin says quietly. "But to know how to cure the plague, we must understand it." Elric drops the mask. It clatters against the stone. "You don't understand the plague," he replies. "You just gave it a clipboard." He turns away. Lady Rosamond groans, faint but alive. He rushes to her. Bandages. Salve. No snake oil this time. No tricks. Just care. He doesn't see Severin walk out. He doesn't see what's in the man's satchel. But he does know one thing. The plague doctor's not done experimenting. If you've ever wondered how history forgets monsters, the answer is simple. They leave town before the records are written. By the time Elric finishes treating Lady Rosamond, or at least wrapping her in enough garlic and gauze to buy her a few more days, Severin is gone. Not just from the manor, from the village entirely. No beaked mask hanging by the apothecary door, no chalk notes, no whispered prescriptions, just a scorched mark on the wooden counter where a vial once spilled something unholy, and the lingering scent of dried rosemary, that old medieval perfume for fear disguised as health. The town doesn't ask questions. Not out loud. The nobles are too sick to care. The peasants are too used to loss. And the priest, conveniently, has discovered a newfound belief in divine cycles, which is a spiritual way of saying, let's not poke the bear. Elric returns to his shop, feet dragging like he's wading through weeks instead of mud. The shelves are bare, the mortar's chipped. The leech jar has mysteriously gone missing. Honestly, that one might be a blessing. He sits. No potions today, no poultices, just silence, and the quiet knowledge that he has become something dangerously rare in a plague-struck village. A witness. He knows what Severin did. He knows the pattern, the herbs, the fire, the dosages. But most of all, he knows this wasn't the first village the plague doctor visited. And it won't be the last. Now, let's be fair. Not everything Severin did was harmful. A few of his concoctions worked. Accidentally, mostly. Some of the vinegar compresses helped. One noble credits him for a complete recovery, though she also claims her dog can now speak Latin. So perhaps take that with a spoonful of salt and dried mint. But here's the trouble with trial-by-death medicine. You can't outrun consequences forever. So Elric makes a choice. He starts writing. Not a medical text, not a ledger, a warning. It's messy, scrawled in ink made from soot and wine, but it tells the truth. About Severin, about Blackwort, about using hope as a scalpel. He hides the scroll beneath the floorboards, where the rats won't find it, but maybe history will. Then he begins again. He forages. Not for snakes this time, but for feverfew, chamomile, horehound, plants that calm, soothe, actually help. No illusions, no sacred relics made of goat bits. Just grounded, honest herbcraft. And people come. Cautiously, at first. A child with a rash, a man with a cough, a woman too tired to pray. They don't ask for miracles. They ask for comfort. And Elric gives it. Bit by bit, day by day, the shop becomes what it was always supposed to be. Not a temple of cures, but a place where illness isn't faced alone. Historical curiosity pill for the road? In plague times, apothecaries were often blamed when things went wrong, sometimes burned with their books. But others? They survived. Quietly. Persistently. Because they knew the truth. Healing doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it just means staying. And Elric? He stayed. Years later, a different doctor arrives. Younger, hopeful, carries a satchel, not a scythe. Elric gives him tea. No questions, just advice. Don't trust anyone who calls death a teacher. The fire crackles. The herbs hang from the rafters like sleepy ghosts. Outside, the world is still sick. But inside, a man is learning how to fight it without becoming part of it. One spoonful of truth at a time. And so ends the story of Elric the Apothecary, who could not cure the plague, but did something far rarer. He didn't run. The third history is why you wouldn't last a day. As the gravedigger serving a plague-ravaged town, imagine waking up with a mouthful of hay, a rat in your boot, and the distinct feeling that the world has ended, and you were somehow not invited. Congratulations. You're the town gravedigger in the year of our Lord 1349, smack in the middle of the Black Death, and for reasons you no longer remember, you agreed to dig holes for a living. The stench is the first thing that hits you, not gradually. No, it slaps you across the face like a scorned noblewoman with a fish. It's a blend of rotting cabbage, spoiled flesh, and despair, with just a hint of wet moss and medieval regret. And it's not just from outside. No, your own clothes, a grim tapestry of sweat, lie, and several unidentifiable stains contribute heavily to the local air quality. You are, for lack of a better word, an ecosystem. Now, rise from your straw mattress. It's not exactly memory foam, unless you count the memory of that flea bite from last Tuesday that still itches like sin. The straw's damp. The lice are active, and you're not entirely sure whether the thing curled up in the corner is your dog or just a large, sentient clump of rags. The bell of St. Gilbert's clangs in the distance, a sound that once meant mass or market, now just means another batch of customers. You don't run a business, exactly. You run damage control. The plague arrived 6 weeks ago, and now it's basically managing the town, with you as its very tired, very unwilling secretary. Your tools await: a spade, a rope, a cart, and a deep, abiding grudge against God. The spade is warped. The rope is frayed. The cart has one wheel that squeaks like a cursed soul and another that doesn't touch the ground at all. But you? you're still here. You and your surprisingly strong lower back. No one wants to talk to you anymore, which would hurt your feelings, if you had any left. Being the gravedigger means people cross the street when they see you, even if it's to wade through what was once the tannery, but is now just a swamp of bad decisions and tannin runoff. You're not contagious, of course. At least, you don't think so. But you're close enough to death to make people uncomfortable. Breakfast is a crust of bread that could double as a weapon, dipped in thin beer because water is just plague soup with fewer bubbles. The ale is warm. Everything is warm. Except the pit in your stomach that grows wider every day, you wheel another body to the edge of town and toss it into the ever-deepening trench of doom. Let's talk about the trench. You started with proper burials, wooden coffins, a few whispered prayers. You even tried to space them out, but that was before the second wave hit. Now the bodies come in faster than the priests can bless them, and the trench is less a burial ground and more a horrifying game of Tetris, with limbs sticking out like poorly packed firewood. The mayor, a man who once fined you for sneezing too close to the baker's wife, is now a puddle of regrets and boils, resting peacefully somewhere under the elm tree, with a broken comb jammed in his pocket. No one even noticed he was gone until the rats started forming a queue outside his window. You dragged the cart to the front of the infirmary. Well, what used to be the infirmary. Now it's just a barn with two overworked nuns and a monk who hums to himself while rubbing garlic on people's feet. It doesn't help, but it does make everyone smell equally terrible, which is honestly quite democratic. 3 bodies today. One of them you recognize. Old Peter, the candle maker. You bought beeswax from him once and he overcharged you. You never forgave him. Now he's stiff as a spoiled turnip, and you can't help but feel that this is, somehow, cosmic justice. You load him up, careful not to jostle too much. They leak, you know. As you trudge toward the burial ground, the wind shifts, carrying with it the unmistakable odor of decomposition and, faintly, burnt time. The apothecary has taken to burning herbs non-stop, believing it keeps the plague at bay. It doesn't. But it does make the town smell like a sickly roast chicken. You reach the trench. It's wider now, deeper. A grotesque timeline etched into the earth. The topmost layers are still pink, vaguely human, but dig a bit deeper and things get abstract. Bones poke through like fingers accusing the sky. Eyes, long burst, left sockets like tiny open mouths in silent protest. You don't look too closely anymore. You just dig, dump, and hope the earth swallows them fast. But not too fast. You still need to bank those hours. There's a boy nearby, 10, maybe 11. He watches from a safe distance, nose buried in his sleeve, as if the wool might shield him from reality. You wave. He doesn't wave back, just stares. Eventually he asks, "Is my mom down there?" You don't answer. You just keep digging. Some days the work is physical. Other days it's spiritual, in the worst possible way. Your prayers have become sarcasm. You ask Saint Sebastian to send better shovels. You joke with Saint Roch about who smells worse. No one laughs, but you keep doing it. Because if you stop, you might start crying. And that would make your eyes swell. And if your eyes swell, people might think you're infected. And if they think you're infected, you shovel faster. By midday, you've buried 12 more. You sit on a tree stump gnawing on a hunk of smoked eel, trying not to think about how many of today's customers still twitched when you picked them up. Sometimes they're just unconscious. Sometimes you're not sure. Once, you dug someone back up by mistake. You don't talk about that. As the sun slumps lower, the sky bleeds orange over the rooftops. Smoke rises from the baker's oven. Someone's still making bread somehow. Bells toll again, slower now. Another death. Maybe two. You'll check tomorrow. Or the next day. Time is soup now. You drag the cart back through mud and silence. You pass a tavern where no one drinks, a church where no one kneels, a square where no one gathers. The town is a living corpse, and you, its faithful undertaker. But tonight, for once, no one screams. No new visitors claw at the door. Just you, your straw mattress, and the rustle of rats in the thatch. And that, somehow, is what passes for peace. Sleep tight, digger. Tomorrow's going to be busy. The rooster didn't crow this morning, probably because the rooster is dead. And if he isn't, he's smart enough to keep quiet, which already makes him the wisest living creature in the village. So instead, you're woken by a sound that's become your version of an alarm clock. The soft thud of a body collapsing outside your door. You don't rush to check. You sip your breakfast beer, which now comes with a slight crunch thanks to the grain husks floating in it, and stretch your spine until it makes a sound like old rope giving way. Then, with all the energy of a particularly mournful slug, you open the door. It's Thomas. At least, what's left of him. Thomas was the cooper, barrel maker, solid man, kind in a distracted way. He once gave you a wheel of cheese just because you patched his wife's roof. Now he's lying in your mud patch, face blue, chest still. You nudge him with your toe. No response. You make a note to get the wheelbarrow. But before you can fetch it, you notice something far more troubling. His nose is missing. Gone. Vanished. Like it just packed up and left in the night. In its place is a smooth crater, leaking something that definitely isn't holy oil. You've seen all sorts of horrors in the past few months. But this is new. You lean down, ever so slightly, inspecting the gap where Thomas's face used to be. And there it is. The faint rustling of movement. A worm. Inside. You quickly look away. Not because you're squeamish, but because it's rude to stare. You fetch the wheelbarrow. It's got a new rattle now. Something probably fell off, but as long as the body stays in, it's fine. You tip Thomas in, careful not to jostle too much. No one likes a nose crumb trail. As you trudge toward the burial trench, which now resembles something between a collapsed cellar and the devil's compost heap, you pass the herbalist's cottage. She's outside, rubbing rosemary into the doorframe and muttering about balance and humors. Her nose twitches when she sees you. "Was that Thomas?" she calls. "Used to be," you reply. She nods, as if that explains everything. You arrive at the trench to find it already occupied. Not by mourners, of course, don't be ridiculous. No, it's the monk again, Brother Anselm. He's kneeling at the edge of the pit, whispering Latin so quietly it sounds like he's apologizing to the worms. Anselm doesn't look up. He just says, "Fifth this morning." You raise your eyebrows. "That you've seen?" "That I've buried," he says, without turning around. You pause. Well, so much for being indispensable. You tip Thomas into the pit, and as always, he lands badly. You climb in to rearrange things, because even in a plague pit, there's etiquette. You can't just leave limbs sticking out like misplaced firewood. There are standards, loosely defined, vaguely remembered, mostly ignored, but still standards. You finish the burial, cover him with earth, and stand there for a moment longer than usual. Not out of sentiment, but because you need a break. And this is the only place no one bothers you anymore. The trench has become your sanctuary. Isn't that ironic? Everyone else avoids it like it's cursed, which, to be fair, it absolutely is. But to you, it's calm. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't expect you to smile. And it always has room for one more. But the quiet doesn't last. Because suddenly, there's shouting from the direction of the square. And shouting never brings anything good. You grab your spade, not for digging, but because it has conversation-ender energy, and march off. At the edge of the village, a crowd has gathered. That's new. Crowds are rare these days. People tend to scatter like pigeons in a thunderstorm. But now they're standing in a half circle around something. Or someone. You push through, spade first, and behold, a cart. A fancy cart, with iron-rimmed wheels, actual carvings on the side, and a painted crest you don't recognize. More importantly, it smells clean. As in, not drenched in sorrow clean. Two men in fine robes stand beside it, both looking like they've never dug a hole in their life. One's holding a long scroll. The other, a very shiny cross. "Who's in charge here?" one of them asks. Everyone turns and looks at you. Oh, great. You squint. Define in charge. "We come on behalf of the bishop. We've been sent to perform inspections, disease containment, sacramental compliance." You blink. Of what? He unrolls the scroll. Of the bodies. You look at the crowd, then at the pit. Then at your hands, which are currently covered in someone else's jawbone. "Bit late for that," you say, but they insist. They want names, dates, proper separation of the blessed from the suspiciously pagan. They start quoting scripture. One of them mentions exhumation. You don't laugh, not because it isn't funny, it's hilarious, but because it might actually happen. And then the scroll holder points at you and says, "You'll assist us tomorrow morning with records and identification." Now, here's the thing about being a gravedigger. You see everything. You know who cheated on their wife, who died with coins sewn into their underpants, who faked being sick so they wouldn't have to pay the tithes. You even buried someone's mistress last week, 3 feet from his actual wife. Let's just say identification is going to be approximate. You nod slowly. Of course, right after I polish the moon. They don't get the joke. Back in your hut, you light a tiny lamp and sit down on your crate, which serves as a table, chair, bed support, and occasional rat trap. You write nothing. You read nothing. Just stare into the flickering flame and wonder how many more days the trench will last before the earth decides it's had enough. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear coughing. Then silence. And somewhere, very faintly, the bells toll again. You close your eyes. Tomorrow, there will be more. There's always more. You know it's going to be a bad day when a man in a fur-lined robe knocks on your door before sunrise. Not because of the robe. You've seen worse fashion choices at the village maypole dance. But because no one with fur this clean has ever brought good news. You open the door wearing your usual attire. One shirt, once beige, now a shade you could call dirt by candlelight. 2 layers of regret, and the smell of last week's trench still clinging to your sleeves. The visitor doesn't flinch, which is suspicious in itself. People normally recoil like you just offered them a bite of week-old eel pie. "Gravedigger," he says. No name, no pleasantries, just the title. "Clergy inspector," you reply. "A guess, based on the hat." He nods. "We begin the audit now." "Of the pit?" "No, of the blessed dead. Identification, cataloging. sacramental compliance. You blink slowly. Right. Just let me finish my porridge and find where I left the concept of hope. He doesn't laugh. Shame. It was one of your better lines. Now, a few things about plague-era audits. 1. They're never timely. The plague arrived months ago. Bodies piled up like firewood in a famine. Prayers were said, then muttered, then forgotten. Coffins ran out. Names blurred. Death outpaced documentation by a comfortable 2 furlongs. 2. They're entirely for show. The bishop isn't worried about who died. He's worried about whether they died correctly. Facing east. Crossed arms. No heretical talismans tucked in. Just wholesome, God-approved decay. And 3, they always involve digging someone back up. Usually, the wrong one. So off you go. Back to the pit, trailed by the inspector, and 2 nervous scribes whose main qualifications seem to be ill-fitting robes and chronic quill anxiety. You arrive at the trench, or, as you now think of it, your resume. The inspector pulls a scroll from his sleeve and begins reading names. Old ones. People you buried weeks ago. He reads like he expects answers. Marjorie, wife of Elias, died of fever. Buried with sacrament? You squint at the pit like it might answer for you. Could have been the one in the patched bonnet, or the one with the crucifix tucked into her shoe. He frowns. And how do you know that? She had a crucifix in her shoe. A long pause, then, why? Didn't ask. She was busy dying at the time. He makes a note. Probably, gravedigger unhelpful. Possibly possessed. Next name, Wilmot the Butcher. Big man, smelled of onions. We had to double the depth. And the sacrament, you think? The priest was drunk that day. Mumbled something. Might have been a blessing. Might have been a threat. A third name. John of Lichfield. Excommunicated? Oh, definitely. He died cursing the bishop, his neighbors, and whoever invented taxes. Was he buried in consecrated ground? You point to the left side of the trench. That half is consecrated. And the other half? Used to be a potato field. So, only spiritually. At this point, one of the scribes starts coughing. Everyone freezes. He waves a hand and mutters, "Just the hay fever." No one believes him. Then, the moment you've been dreading, the inspector wants a demonstration. "Exhume one," he says casually, like he's asking you to fetch a turnip. "Let's see the condition." You stare. Condition? Like a second-hand tunic? Posture? Symbolism? Decomposition? You sigh the deep, long sigh of a man who has long since lost the energy to argue with ecclesiastical nonsense. You pick a shallow one, recent, soft earth, no suspicious squirming, and start digging. The smell greets you like an old friend, familiar, horrible, comforting, in a strange, deeply unsettling way. You hit fabric, lift gently. Out comes Beatrice. You remember her. Wore blue, liked honey, died quietly. Now she's just bones and sorrow. The inspector leans in. "Is that a goat skull?" You frown. "No, that's her face." Another pause. "Ah." The scribes are visibly sweating now. One writes something down. The other just draws a cross on his own chest and tries not to faint. Beatrice goes back in. You smooth the dirt, pat it once for good measure, and say a quiet apology. Not that she minds. She's been through worse. But before you can declare the audit over, a commotion begins at the far end of the field. Yelling, barking, a blur of hooves. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, a goat barrels into the burial site, dragging behind it a small cart and a very panicked child. The goat stops right at the trench, looks at the inspector, sneezes. The child, breathless, explains, "It's Father Jerome's. He was using it to deliver last rites." You all stare at the goat. The inspector clears his throat. "And where is Father Jerome now?" The boy shrugs. "He said he heard angels, went into the woods. Alive? Maybe?" The goat bleats. The inspector closes his scroll. "This is becoming irregular." You nod. "You're just now realizing?" He declares the audit postponed and retreats, scribes in tow, muttering about further investigation and possible exorcism. You're left alone. Again. Just you, the pit, and the goat, who is now nibbling on your spade. You shoo it away. It doesn't listen. You let it stay. Back in your hut, the day fades into the usual cold, bitter quiet. No visitors. No screaming. No bells. The plague is resting today. And as you lie down, one final thought nudges you. You never did find out why that woman had a crucifix in her shoe. You smile. Maybe tomorrow you'll ask her. At some point in your life, you imagined dying in your sleep, old, warm, perhaps slightly drunk, not scrabbling for a bucket while your lungs tried to leap out of your throat. But here we are. You wake to coughing. Not yours, someone else's. Close. Desperate. You sit up. Your joints creak in protest. The air is thick, not just with cold, but with something worse. Smoke. That gets your attention. You stumble outside and there it is. The church. Burning. To clarify, not some back alley stable or that cursed grain shed that's always attracting lightning. No, it's the church. The stone one. The one with the bell tower and the suspiciously smug statue of St. Leonard out front. Well, was stone. The roof, however, was timber. Very old, very dry, and now very much ablaze. Half the village is standing around it, slack-jawed and utterly useless, which, to be fair, is their default setting during a crisis. Someone's trying to throw water at it with a wooden ladle, which is about as effective as scolding the fire. You spot Brother Anselm flapping his robes and shouting, "The relics! We must save the relics!" What relics? You vaguely remember something about St. Cuthbert's molar in a jar. You're not sure it was ever real. More pressing, if the church is gone, so is half the town's perceived protection against the plague. People believed in that roof. They thought the incense worked. They thought Anselm's mumbled blessings were actual disease repellents and not just garlic breath with ambition. And now the sanctuary is collapsing into itself like an excommunicated souffle. You're handed a bucket. You don't know by whom. You stare into it. It's empty. Of course it is. You hand it back. Fire's not your domain. Earth is. You bury the aftermath. And sure enough, by midday, the church is nothing but charred beams and a puddle of holy disappointment. Miraculously, the bell survived. Less miraculously, it fell during the collapse and crushed the priest's chicken coop. The priest is upset. The chickens are, well, let's just say they've met St. Cuthbert in person now. Anselm assembles the remaining villagers. His sermon, delivered atop a still-warm foundation stone, is not what you'd call reassuring. "This is a sign," he bellows. "A test." Yes, that's right. According to him, God set his own church on fire to teach you a lesson. Possibly about humility. Possibly about sin. Possibly just because he was bored. You're not entirely sure what Anselm's plan is. Rebuild? Pray harder? Dig a hole and hope for rain? But as the sun lowers and the smoke begins to settle, you notice something far more concerning. The plague is back. Or, more accurately, it never left. It simply took a day off, and now it's clocked back in with a vengeance. You know the signs: the vacant stare, the sudden staggering, the frantic mumbling about heat and cold at the same time. And then the boils. Always the boils. 3 new cases today. One of them, a child. You help carry her to the makeshift infirmary, which is just the weaver's shed now, stuffed with old straw and a few half-hearted herbs nailed to the door. The herbalist greets you. Her eyes are tired in a way that no sleep can fix. "She was fine yesterday," she mutters. "Weren't we all?" you reply. She gives you a look. Not annoyed, just human. The kind of look people used to give before the world turned into a corpse parade. You leave the girl in her care and step back outside. The town smells like soot and fear. And yet, life continues. Someone is repairing a fence. Someone is gutting a fish. You even hear laughter, children running through the ashes barefoot, because why not? They've already survived everything else. It's bizarre. It's beautiful. It's infuriating. You spend the afternoon digging a new row in the trench, not because anyone's died yet, but because you're an optimist. And as you work, you spot something new in the dirt. A small coin. Bronze. Worn. You brush it off. It bears the face of a king you don't remember, possibly because he only ruled for 12 weeks and died of gout. You pocket it. A few feet deeper, you strike wood. Not coffin wood. Older. Darker. Buried wood. Curious, you dig around it. It's a box. Small. Sealed. Strangely intact. You open it, expecting bones or worse. But instead, you find seeds, wrapped in waxed cloth, carefully stored. You stare. Seeds. In the middle of all this death, seeds. You don't cry, but you come close. Later, as night falls and the stars crawl reluctantly into view, you sit by the hearth in your hut and examine them again. The fire sputters. The wind moans. And you, the village gravedigger, sit with a lap full of potential. Maybe they're just turnips. Maybe they won't grow. But maybe they will. And that thought, somehow, is enough to carry you to sleep. For tonight. Because tomorrow? Tomorrow's going to be worse. You wake up to silence. Not the comforting kind, like snow falling or everyone finally giving up on asking you to bathe. No, this is the sharp, heavy silence that lands on your chest like a stone and waits to see what you'll do next. No bells, no coughing, no squawking chickens, just air that feels paused. Your fire has gone out, which is unfortunate because so have your toes, from the feel of it. You wrap yourself in your scratchiest, least terrifying blanket, the one that smells vaguely of onions and funeral herbs, and step outside into a frost-bitten morning that looks like the sky forgot how to be alive. The church is still a skeleton, just black beams and a tower of ash. But now, someone stuck a wooden cross in the ruins, tied with dried lavender and a shoelace. You're not sure who. Maybe Anselm. Maybe someone who thinks symbols work better than actual roofs. You walk past the baker's house. It's empty. Still warm from a fire that burned itself out, but no one's home. You check the back. There they are, the baker, his wife, and both boys, curled together under a blanket, stiff as last week's rye bread. You count their fingers. All still there, which is something. You mark the door with chalk, not that anyone else will come, and move on. There's a phrase you heard once, back when people still held festivals, and you could drink from a cup without wondering who touched it. Last, the village is dying. It was always said dramatically. usually by someone trying to justify digging another useless irrigation ditch or blaming the flax harvest on sin. But today, walking through the still streets of your town, you realize something worse. The village isn't dying. It's almost done. There are maybe 15 people left now, if you count the baby who hasn't stopped crying since Tuesday, and the old man who insists his cat can speak Latin. You've buried half the town. You've watched the other half bury each other, and you're running out of earth. The pit is nearly full. You dig deeper. The soil is frozen now. It clings to the shovel like it's trying to drag you down instead. Each scoop is a fight, each breath a dare. And still, you dig. Because that's what you do. When everything else crumbles, priests, leaders, the illusion that saints are watching, you dig. You make the space. You make the silence that follows. Anselm appears just before noon. He doesn't speak right away, just sits on a stump near the trench and watches you work. He's wearing 3 cloaks and no shoes, which is either a sign of divine enlightenment or that he's lost the last of his marbles. You're betting on the marbles. Eventually, he says, "Do you believe in heaven?" You stop. Not dramatically. You're too tired for drama. But enough to let him know he has your attention. You think about the girl you carried to the infirmary 3 days ago. She died that night. You dug her grave extra deep, wrapped her in her mother's shawl, and even said a few words. Not from scripture, but about squirrels. She liked squirrels. That seemed more useful. "I believe in dirt," you say. Anselm nods. That'll do. He leaves something behind when he goes. A satchel. Inside, a heel of bread, a small sealed flask, and the last page of a book of hours, so worn it's barely legible. You tuck it under your arm, not because you need it, but because it feels like someone tried. That night, you dream of seeds. They're everywhere. In the ground, in your pockets, sprouting through your floorboards and between the teeth of the dead. The trench fills not with bodies, but with vines. Thick green stalks rising skyward, curling around bones and prayer beads alike. You wake up to birdsong. Real, sharp, unexpected. A sparrow sitting on your shovel handle, cleaning its feathers like the last 6 months never happened. You sit very still. The air tastes clean. Outside, the frost is melting. You walk to the trench and find it undisturbed. No one knew today. A miracle. You check the infirmary. Still quiet. The weaver is sewing. The child who survived is laughing. The goat, yes, the goat's still alive, has taken up residence in the burned-out church and refuses to be moved. You allow it. Let the goat keep watch now. The bell tower was never picky about theology anyway. You plant the seeds, just a few, in a patch behind your hut where the earth is softest. You don't expect them to grow, but you plant them anyway. And when you lie down that night, the sky overhead is clear for the first time in weeks. No smoke, no clouds, just stars. You close your eyes, not because you're tired, though you are, but because it's quiet, peaceful, and for the first time since the plague arrived, the ground doesn't feel hungry. It feels ready. So rest now, gravedigger. You've done your part. Tomorrow, someone else can hold the shovel.